Well, good morning to those of us on the West Coast and middle of the country. Good, I guess, afternoon now, Laura, on the East Coast. Welcome to our webinar today. One of the great pleasures of working at Alloy is we get to interact with true pioneers in the retail space. And today we get to have a conversation with my good friend, Larra Haftevani, of Billie, who's been working with us for quite some time. And as you'll hear, she's been leading the retail launch for the Billie brand. We're going to go ahead and get started here. Just a couple housekeeping notes before we dive further in. One thing you're going to note, so for those of you who submitted questions ahead of time, thank you so much. We've got those noted. We're absolutely going to discuss those as long as time allows. Also, though, I just want to encourage you, if you didn't submit ahead of time, totally fine. There's a Q&A button down at the bottom of the screen or kind of on your Zoom bar. Feel free to submit questions there. You can also submit comments through the chat. We're going to be monitoring that, and we'll do our best to respond to as many questions as we can. Laura, thank you so much for joining us. Do you mind just giving us a quick introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. A little intro on Billie. It was founded in late 2017. It went viral immediately. The founders always talk about how they had no idea how they were going to sell through all the products that they had ordered. And within 2 days, they had sold across the entire country. So definitely a need for this product in this market. At the end of last year, we got acquired by Edgewell Personal Care. And at the beginning of this year, we launched in 4,600 Walmart stores across the nation. What's been really exciting to see is that we've quickly risen to the number 2 shave brand within systems, so within the handle segment, with a path to number 1. So it's really nice to see the customers reacting well to our product and to our brand. And a little background on Billie. So the mission here was to bring innovation, fair pricing, and just a little bit of magic into everyday routines. And the focus has been to continue to build a new body brand for womankind. Some of the specifics around that was when the founders founded Billie, they really focused on eliminating the pink tax. So bringing down the price of women's razors to what men are paying, right? Because notoriously feminine products are charged more. Another big thing that Billie did, which resonated across across not only our customer base, but kind of went and shook up the way that we really think about shave, was Billie was the first brand to really show women's body hair within the advertisement. So, we're not shaving our skin, we're shaving our hair. And it was really nice to kind of bring that to the forefront. And then it's been, we're nothing without our customers and without our core product. And we've have amazing customers who have given us over 10,000 5-star reviews on our products across the categories. So it's really nice to see that, it's good product market fit. We're resonating with the customer, and we're just getting started here with retail.
Laura, that's phenomenal. I appreciate that overview. And obviously I've seen this page before as we put this deck together, but I missed the stat in the lower left corner that number 2 women's shave system nationwide. That's phenomenal. I'll just give a really quick, before we dive into, everyone wants to hear from you, Laura, but really quickly, just for folks who are just kind of new to the Alloy space and what we do, we're the connected planning and execution platform for brands. And so really our whole vision is we work with brands like Billie and many others to help them reveal that true demand signal from your retailers, from your e-commerce business. And then we use that information to make much better decisions upstream. So that involves demand planning, that involves the visual management of how your sales is working and looking. It informs, we've got lots of users who are on the marketing side who do A/B testing, finance folks, operations folks. It's all about, as we think about the demand shocks of the last couple of years, how can we be ahead of that? How can we understand what's actually happening with our products on the shelves or in e-commerce sites and make better upstream decisions as a result of that? Also, I know I forgot to introduce myself as well. I'm Nick, and I lead our client solutions account management team as well. So, which is part of why I've had the pleasure of working with Laura. So I'm going to shift out of presentation mode. We're definitely not going to sit in that. And just as a reminder, again, folks, this is intended to be hopefully an enjoyable and informal conversation where we absolutely welcome questions. We welcome other input. So please do submit those through the Q&A piece down there. So Laura, just as a first question here, I mean, obviously you are a pioneer in Equip before now. You've in helping them grow in their retail space. Now you're doing it at Billie. As you think about, like, I think people on the call would love to just hear, as you moved into that, as you thought about planning, how do we move into a new retailer? Like, what matters most to you as you're working through that strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing is that it's never a one person task, that it is absolutely not only a team effort, but a true cross-functional effort across the organization to bring retail to life. And whether that's expanding from, 2,000, 10,000 doors or going from 0 to 1, like absolutely a team effort across the org. There's a lot to consider. When you move into retail. I think some of the most important considerations are, one, why are you launching? Will increase distribution better serve your customer, right? Are you going to be able to address them where they're currently shopping? Two, it's going to be about choosing the absolute best launch partner that's going to give you the most impactful launch. Another one I think that's important is to think about timing and funding. So timing, where are you in trajectory of your business? Is this the right time for expansion? And then for funding, is there capital available for inventory, for additional vendors you're bringing on, for marketing expenses? And then the final piece is product assortment. So you look at everything that you're selling, but what really makes sense and is going to resonate at retail? What are the unit economics, and what is truly going to be successful within these new distribution channels?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know obviously right now you're having this huge launch that's been, it sounds like, very effective at Walmart thus far. I'm curious, I mean, have there been obstacles that you've faced that you've had to work through, or are there some common obstacles that you've seen that our folks on the call today can relate to?
Yeah, I think the biggest obstacle is that coming from a traditional D2C business to a retail business is that you're all of a sudden creating way more space between you and your customer. So on D2C, we get to speak directly to our customer. We serve them, we give them exactly what they want. They're able to write into us and we can solve issues if they arise. Where at retail, you're speaking to your customer, but you're speaking through the retailer. So it can get muffled, it can get noisy, it can get difficult. And so I think that it's almost like a little bit of a loss of control, but that I think is one of the hardest obstacles to overcome. And then I think the other piece is about setting expectations internally. So retail is really nuanced and complicated, and it's really important to expect the unexpected and just be prepared to deal with obstacles that you would have never thought would.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And especially kind of in these early days. So you mentioned there can be some obstacles that you don't expect. What are there some key metrics and signals that you're watching to kind of monitor how that's going and be able to adjust quickly?
Yeah, so I think in the early days of launching are probably some of the most crucial. Is probably the most crucial time, because you're really setting products on shelf, and your number one priority should be getting products on shelf. So, and then once that launches, that's where you're really looking at dashboards to show your inventory. You're on hand, you're on order, from by SKU per door, and really just honing in on the detail to understand did my products end up on shelf?
So really, that do I have inventory in the stores is kind of,
exactly. Did the product set the way that it was supposed to set? Because again, when you're looking at a Walmart, it's 4,600 doors, very different than a .com business where you're controlling so much of it.
Sure.
And the reason for that is because if your product isn't there, everything you've done, like none of it will resonate with your customer, right? If that product is not available for your consumer, it doesn't matter at the end. So product on shelf is the number one thing to consider at launch.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, Larra, as you're progressing along, like in the past couple of months, as things, you've got those initial shipments on the shelves and you're watching that. I mean, how long do you kind of continue monitoring that inventory, or at what point do you start really focusing on, hey, do you start looking at sales then? Are there other things that you monitor as things kind of mature and progress?
Yeah, absolutely. I think inventory is one of the metrics that you never stop looking at on a weekly basis. I think sales is the exciting part. It's like the report card. So you're looking at it.
The reward.
But sales is tough, right? In the first, right now we're looking at like 6 to 8 weeks before sales normalize at these mass retailers. So you're looking at it, but it's not really reading. It's not really reading correctly, right? Because you're still ramping. But inventory you should be looking at that every single week and making sure like your weeks of supply is correct. You're not overstocked because that's risky. You're not out of stock because that's bad, for your business. So it's really finding that perfect balance of enough inventory in stores, in your DCs, and then in your pipeline, right? So like the on hands are coming in correctly as well.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I like that notion of sales is like the dessert you get for executing correctly, but the execution still really matters. I would love to jump to a poll question if that's all right. So folks, you're going to see a little pop-up on your Zoom screen, and that poll question is, hey, what kind of data are you using to inform your launch strategy? Whether that's, and maybe you haven't just launched in a new retailer, but maybe that's new doors or a new product. So yeah, just curious to see kind of what folks are looking at from a data standpoint. We'll give that just a couple minutes, or maybe more like 30 seconds here. All right, let's see. Okay, I think everybody can see the results of this poll. So yeah, it looks like, I don't know. So it looks like 48% of you said kind of daily granular retail POS data. It looks like 65% are looking at that weekly aggregated POS data. It's interesting. I don't know, Larra, if you've got any reflections on this. It's interesting to think that, about half of folks who are responding here maybe aren't looking at that daily granular retail data. I don't know if you have any reflections.
I think it has to do with the maturity of your business. So if you're a mature business, if you've been in retail for 3+ years, like looking at daily data can actually probably be a hindrance, right? Because it starts to get confusing because you're looking too much at knee-jerk, have like a knee-jerk reaction to what you're seeing. I think weekly aggregated POS is very standard, right? You're looking at week over week sales. I think that monthly and yearly is also a great way to take a step back to look at seasonality and what could have happened. And then syndicated data also makes sense. Actually interesting. I would have thought syndicated data would have been higher than this, but that's interesting. So it might be based on like, different categories or different types of businesses are not as reactive to what's happening in the market.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So, I mean, Larra, as you continue your retail expansion, you touched on this a little bit, but can you talk just a little bit more about how you leverage real-time demand data to inform your planning kind of going forward as you get more mature in the launch?
Yeah, so after you've launched in your first retailer and we're starting to look at data, I think that leveraging real-time data to tell your story and and to really show how you're interacting with the consumer at the current retailer you're in or retailer you're in is so important. It's something that we're definitely using as we're speaking to new retailers about just what's happening, and again, just crafting that story. And I think also like just thinking about how I've leveraged Alloy specifically. I think it's about like pulling together, honestly, in my opinion, like product level data of really like, how is this improvement working, what's working and what's not, what's strong, how are we serving that customer, and then how do we continue to serve that customer across various channels and experiences.
That's so interesting, Larra. Yeah, because I think if I can summarize it, it sounds like you're saying, hey, you use that data that you're collecting, to kind of make a case to potential future retail partners. So it's no longer just about, hey, how do I manage this early retail partner? How do I also make the case to others? But then it sounds like you're also mentioning this notion of, hey, but within Walmart, for instance, where you already are, it's also helpful to be able to see, hey, what products are performing really well and kind of where can I have future expansion? Is that fair to say?
Exactly.
No, that's interesting. A question kind of a little bit Alloy focused, Larra. So you've been, obviously we mentioned an Alloy customer now at a couple different brands. What about Alloy in particular kind of, why keep using Alloy across a couple different brands that you've been at?
Yeah, definitely an Alloy champion. I think it's because I come from a traditionally retail background of like fashion, and the reporting that we had access to was atrocious, right? Compared to what we saw at Alloy. So it's a big difference. So I've seen how bad it can be. So I'm very grateful for having a tool like Alloy. I think the two things that by far stand out to me are the simplicity of use, like how common sense the dashboards are. And so if I'm looking to do something, I can do it myself. And then the second piece of that is like the customer service. So having like an account rep, and if I am building something and I'm stuck, and you know this, I've many emails to you, Nick, about like, how do I get this? I'm trying to show this. I need this for a deck. Like, how do I show this point? I think it's awesome to have someone on the Alloy side to be able to like build dashboards with me, and to continue to show us the new capabilities of, storytelling.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Definitely the second one, Larra. No, I appreciate that. We're going to do one more polling question here as we go through this. Question number 2 here is kind of, what is the primary way that you are ingesting that demand data across your retailers? So I'm curious to see how people are. I know we've got a mix too today, and Larra, we haven't necessarily talked about this, but I see we've got a mix of kind of current customers of Alloy, so folks who are probably fairly familiar with it, and as well as some folks who aren't currently using Alloy. All right. We'll wrap up here. Okay, here are the results. So primary way you're ingesting demand data, it looks like, looks like about 35% using something like Alloy. 40%, that's interesting, are individually logging into retailer portals. That sounds fun. Receiving Excel files, we know about that. And I'll be interested to see if the person who mentioned other comments in the chat. Does that surprise you, Larra, or does this seem kind of like what you'd expect?
I think it's kind of what I expect. I think what I found really helpful in at Alloy is it's able to aggregate all the different retailers logins and pull that information in, or even in some of the vendors we were working with, retailers we were working with, Nick, we were getting Excel files. We weren't even getting like a real portal, but we were able to somehow find a way to put that into Alloy. And I think what I loved about that was I was able to look at the business across all the retailers and then really evaluate it, right? So I wasn't having to like pull it and putting it into Excel and having to run my math that way. I was able to really use Alloy as like my go-to platform to understand the business.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point. I mean, obviously right now at Billie, you're, I think you've got you've got that first retailer who you're working on, but when you were in a multi-retailer environment, I mean, can you talk a little bit about the impact of having multiple retailers in the same space? Was that helpful? Were there specific things that you do with that information?
Yes, because I think that there's like trends across, it's right. What is it, like 2-3 things are what creates a trend? So if I'm seeing one, if I'm seeing sales lift on a single SKU at one retailer, that's interesting. At 2, my interest is even more peaked, but at 3, I'm like, this is a trend. So we start to understand like why did this happen? Was there marketing put against this, right? Were there ads run? Did an influencer talk about our product? Like what happened to have this lift across all retailers? Because it's just like, the scale matters.
Yeah.
So I think looking at it that way was helpful to understand like what was driving the business, like the total brand business, right? Not the business of a single retailer.
No, that's really interesting, Laura. Thank you. I want to read here. I've got a few more questions to talk through, but I want to jump to a few of the audience submitted questions, if that's okay. We had one question here. So what are the best practices you can recommend in order to sway buyers to place POs when you identify out of stock problems? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges is, so on our side, it's inventory control. On the buyer side, it's also inventory control.
Yeah.
And we kind of want, like, we're on the opposite sides of the coin, but we kind of want the same thing, right? We want to best serve the customer with the least amount of risk. So I think that when you're trying to convince buyers or replenishment managers to purchase more, it's about having like a really tight knit plan, or like really being clear about the data that you're seeing. So again, I would go down to the store level, down to the SKU level, and really show weeks of supply. You do weeks of supply historical or to forecast. You can show trends of how we're trending up, or that you're running marketing and that you expect this lift to be 30% more. You're going to be on feature or on promotion. And then it's just doing the math, right? Of showing like, here's what I have on hand, here's what I have coming in. And based on my current turn, I'm going to be out of stock. And like, that's not something the retailer wants or that you want. And so I think just showing a really clear picture that, in the next 2 weeks, you're going to start hitting really high out of stocks. If more orders aren't hit, is the best way to convey that information and to get the buyer, the replenishment manager, to agree and to write bigger orders.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, do you find that folks are generally receptive, Laura, when you kind of have that conversation from the buyer standpoint? They get it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, on some level, you're helping them with their job because, and again, we are one brand, and as startups, D2C startups, we're probably a really small percentage of their current portfolio. Until you start to, have bigger presence within these retailers. And so they're looking, and like, I'm speaking as a previous buyer, like I was always looking at my biggest brands. Those were the ones that were really, moving the needle on my business. And so the little ones were the ones that were not always getting the attention. Although, if you don't nurture the small ones, they're never going to be able to grow. And so I think that's where a lot of the pressure is put on small brands to then do some of this work and to show and to come to the buyer or the replenishment manager with the plan and with the data of saying, look, like, this is based on my math. We're going to be in really, in poor shape. And so I need you to write bigger orders. And so you've really helped them do the analysis. And now all they need to do is, upload some information. And so usually they're pretty receptive.
That's really interesting. And then, so second audience submitted question here, a little bit related, but what actions can be taken, or what influence can the wholesaler have on the retailer if the wholesaler notices low stock levels, poor performance? I don't know if you've got a lot of experience with the wholesalers though, Laura.
I think if I'm understanding the question correctly.
And feel free to clarify in the chat, anybody too. If we can.
Yeah. Because I think it was the answer. I think they're saying like, what would you do if you needed to push retailers or wholesale, depending on how you look at it, to have better out of stock percentages?
Same story.
I think another thing, I can add a little more color here. I think understanding what the retailer's expectations of weeks of supply is important. So maybe what I consider a healthy weeks of supply is not what the retailer considers a healthy weeks of supply. So I think getting alignment there is crucial, because that's kind of like the middle point of like when they would start, when this order, the system that orders replenishment would start to get triggered into order, bigger orders. So if your weeks of supply expectations are incorrect with your buyer, or like, they're misaligned with your buyer, then that could definitely be leading to out of stocks as well.
So you have that's interesting, Larra. So you have the explicit conversation. What's the number weeks of supply that we should be shooting for? That's, and I can imagine that would be helpful, because then you're both looking at the data and you can make kind of clear decisions based on that.
Absolutely.
We'll definitely keep these Q&A questions coming, and if anybody's got clarifications or anything else that we can help with, please do chime in. I'm going to jump back here to another few questions. So this is kind of just like taking a step back again, Larra. Do you have, like, if you would have one piece of advice for companies who are looking to have a successful launch, what would you say?
I would say prepare for the unexpected. I think I already said that, but I think it is that, like, retail it's challenging, and I think it's super fun, but it's to expect the unexpected and to really be nimble and to have the ability to react quickly and creatively to new opportunities. And I think that's the benefit of being a small company, is that we are used to that, right? We are constantly reacting to things that are happening. This is obviously, or not obviously, but this can be at a larger scale. And so I think it's just being nimble.
Yeah. And I mean, does that, Larra, internally, are there things you put in place that allow you to be more nimble? I mean, is it about how you communicate internally with operations teams? Is it about having kind of more safety stock? Is it just being willing to flex your plan?
I feel like it's like all of that. It's it's being close to the business.
Yeah.
Right. Like for us, we monitor the business on a daily basis. And so, and again, we should not be, and we're not reacting on a daily basis, but you're seeing a trend, right? We're not looking at our sales week over week. We're looking at it day by day. And so if something starts to look off, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, by the 4th day, you're like, okay, well, like, I've been thinking about this for 4 days, and here are my thoughts of like how we can fix this. I think it's definitely operations, like inventory. If you ask any retailer, especially over the last 2 years, like inventory being in stock is the most important metric of success. And so that's, I think, a huge part of it, is like having safety stock, being really like healthy with your inventory, with your like supply chain pipeline, as healthy as we can be right now. And thinking out of the box and doing things that kind of make you uncomfortable, because, unprecedented times, right? So, and you layer on retail on top of that, you're doing things that maybe you never thought you would be.
Yeah. And I like that notion of part of being nimble is just knowing what you should react to. And that means having data that's actionable and that you're looking at on a regular basis. We have another question here in the Q&A. So this is an interesting one. I think it's kind of scratching the next level deeper on keeping in stock, Larra. So they wrote, what are some best practices for store allocation, i.e. weeks of supply for an item might look healthy at the aggregate, but out of stock percent could be high due to that misallocation at the store level. And they ask, hey, have you had any success influencing retailers like Walmart with store allocation?
I feel like that's actually what keeps me up at night, which is kind of scary. But it's, like weeks of supply on an aggregate look kind of great, or like, out of stocks look great because you have stores who don't sell, like they're just low performing doors. And so they're ruining the average, because they're like that a highly productive store, one is the same, they zero out. I think it's looking at data, looking at inventory on a per SKU per store basis which is a lot, right? Especially if you have a lot of SKUs and a lot of distribution. But I think that it's, with a few pivots and trying to like work that data, that is the granularity you need. I think that's the granularity you need as you think about phantom inventory as well. And so I think based on, the resources of each company, it's important to think about, is this something we do on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis? But it should be getting done. And you should be looking at it like that granularly, at least 4 times a year, if not 12 or more.
Right. And of course, I mean, Larra, you're in a space where, Alloy can filter to just the stores where you've got issues potentially. I'm on the kind of second part of the question there on then influencing a retailer like Walmart to make decisions. I mean, does it just go back to, I have a conversation with my buyer, or are there other tactics that you'd use to kind of fix some of those store specific issues?
Yeah, I think it's important to put yourself in the buyer's shoes. Like, they also don't want out of stocks. They also don't want stores that are just having zero sales for weeks and weeks on end. They're also very worried about that. They also understand the climate of their stores right now, and that, it is hard to get staff in. It is, most stores are understaffed. And so you're not getting, shelves are not getting replenished the rates that they were 2 years ago at all. And so they're constantly thinking about that. So if you're able to come to them and say, over the last 4 weeks, these stores have sold zero inventory or zero sales, they have zero inventory, there's nothing coming in. Really, I think showing a clear path to like, here's the issue, here's how to fix it. And then all of it rooted in data, because we're looking at the same data, right? Especially if we take Walmart, for example. Alloy is pulling from retailing. So exactly what we're seeing in Alloy is exactly what the buyer is seeing. It's just a matter of time to like dive into your business yet or not. And so again, by you doing the work and showing it to them, you're kind of letting them skip a step and going straight from like issue to solution instead of doing the analysis. Like, that's the bit that you've done. And I think data in general, right, internally or externally, it's the number one thing that helps to sway people's minds, because it's kind of what we consider fact.
Right. I appreciate that, Larra. Well, unless we have some additional audience submitted questions, which folks are more than welcome to send through, I just have kind of one more question for you, Larra, which is, as you think beyond the launch period, and of course you've got a lot of experience being well post-launch, how do you use Alloy to make your business successful on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So I think that social. So it's looking at weekly sales, looking at trends of total sales, by category, by channel. If you're in multiple retailers, is really monitoring the health of your inventory. So looking at weeks of supply, your out of stocks, phantom inventory, zero sale doors over, several weeks. All of it, right? All of it, just to look at, like, unfortunately, you can't visit every store, right? When we're looking at these, when we're working with these mass retailers. And so this is the best way to get an idea of what's happening in those stores down to the store level, and then actioning against that.
That's great. Larra, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm so excited to continue watching Billie's progress and growth. I think this is a really exciting time for you all. We have one more question. I'm sorry, everybody. Okay, last piece here. How do you currently forecast POS sales to work with your supply chain? I don't know if you have a perspective on that, Larra.
How do we forecast POS sales to work with your supply chain? So we have an internal forecast. We also have a forecast that was given to us by our retailers, right? Every retailer hopefully is providing you with their sales expectations. And then how we're thinking about our supply chain. Actually, this is something that we're working through right now. So we've actually purchased the demand planning tool through Alloy, and we're setting it up now. That's going to really help us in figuring out, like, based on our lead times of, like, not so much like how, like, we know how long it takes us to get products, to our 3PL to ship to Walmart. But the other piece of, like, how quickly is our 3PL sending product to Walmart? How quickly is Walmart sending products to stores? So that whole lead time, I think, is really important to consider. And then with the demand planning tool, it's going to take all that into consideration and then tell us like how quickly we should be ordering. And then it's taking into consideration the supply forecast that we also get from the retailer. So it's kind of like working backwards because, you know, obviously lead times can be weeks to months long. And so that's how we plan on doing it.
Yeah. And I know, Larra, you're in early days, like with the Alloy planning tool. As you think about those retailer provided forecasts that you've mentioned, even in your past experience, how much do you lean on those? How reliable do you find those? Does it vary between retailers? I'm just curious for the overall sense and how you kind of use that or don't use that.
Yeah, I think it definitely varies between retailers because all of them have their own methodology of their plan. The ideal world is that their plan leads up to the dollar demand plan that you've both like agreed on or communicated to you what your expectations are. The thing about a supply plan is that it changes and like it should change, right? It should change based on the sales trends that they're seeing in stores. And so usually you're only getting a supply plan, you know, a few weeks to months out from your current date. But we know that for the most part, our supply chain takes a lot longer than that. And so historicals, whether you have last year or your D2C business, and then it's taking the supply plan that's coming from the retailer. And then it's also, you know, adding a cushion on top of that because it's important that we are able to react to positive trends. And so if all of a sudden, you know, something goes viral and, you know, we're seeing a SKU start to sell out, we always want to have enough backstock so that, you know, customers are getting served because at the end of the day, I think we all do this to serve our customers. And I never want someone walking into a store and not being able to buy the thing that they came or that they want.
Yeah. So is it fair to say, Larra, the retailer forecast is a data point that you're leveraging, but it sounds like it's still important to have your own perspective on what you need to be ready to ship. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Okay, we have another question, Larra. So when you identify store or DC level issues, do you show this to your buyer or to your broker? It says, we've been showing the findings to our broker, but we have gotten pushback from them on escalating to the buyer, e.g. less than 1.5 weeks on hand and on order. It's interesting.
So if I'm going to say this back. So identifying issues, you're low in stock at your store or your DC level, and your broker is saying, don't flag it with the buyer yet, maybe because they're saying like, you know, but if I'm looking at less than 1.5 weeks of supply, I mean, unless you're a very slow turning product, like that feels dangerous. I think I would like push back on the broker and try to understand like why they wouldn't want to, why they wouldn't want to speak to the buyer, right? Is there like a bigger, is there something bigger? Are you super inventoried in something else? And so they feel like it'll bring a microscope to your whole inventory business. And now, you know, maybe you're risking an RTV. There has to be a reason why your broker wouldn't want you to have a more comfortable weeks of supply, more comfortable inventory position. So I think I would just push and try to understand what their thought process is.
It's an interesting question. And Larra, I don't know if you've used, for instance, in Alloy, our lost sales quantification, which is Alloy's estimate of how much you're missing out on for having out of stocks. I don't know if maybe that would also be a compelling number to bring to a broker to say, hey, we're missing this amount of sales. We need to raise this to our buyer.
Yeah, I think every data point, right? Every way you're able to kind of like slice into this to give different perspectives. And especially if all the perspectives are giving the same, are showing the same
way,
outcome, then yes, something is wrong.
Yeah. I appreciate it, Larra. Well, if we don't have other questions, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. It's so good to see you, and it's great to chat with you. And I don't know, any last comments for the folks listening today?
I mean, thank you for coming. 40 minutes with us, and yeah, that's it.
Perfect. Well, good luck with Billie, Larra. We'll be excited to see the growth that you all have. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining. And feel free, if you've got other questions, shoot us a note. We're very happy to help with anything that you've got. And just a last point here, we're going to share around the recording with everybody. So, feel free to share that around, or, give it another look.